Hello and welcome to Tragedies at Sea. I'm Mickey Hansen. Today we're going to be talking about the Lusitania, the grandest liner of her day, thrice winner of the Blue Riband, the ribbon given to the world's fastest ship. Her top speed was 24 knots. She was launched June 6, 1906. The first three superliners built for the Cunard line. Her story begins with J.P. Morgan, the well-known millionaire tycoon, buying up various shipping lines, which would be named the International Merchant Marine. One by one, transit lines were being bought up. By the time it was over, there were only two shipping lines left that were privately owned. The Cunard line just happened to be one of them. But the British government was afraid that the Cunard line would follow suit. To keep this from happening, the British government offered a loan to the Cunard line to build two ships on the condition they remain British for at least 20 years and that they be well built in such a way that they could be easily converted for war purposes. Thus, the Lusitania and the Mauretania were born. The Mauretania would follow suit a couple of years later and would be considerably faster than Lucy, what shipwrights like to call her. One person described the Lusitania as the most beautiful ship, more beautiful than Solomon's Temple, and large enough to hold all of his wives. If you have any questions about the Lusitania or any other ships that I've been discussing, the number is 422-3902. When I do a show, I always focus in on a particular ship, but you're free to talk about any ship you'd like to, whether it be the hit movie you've heard so much about, got the 11 Oscars, or the Monitor or whatever. Well, anyway, the Lusitania was 9 years after she was launched, she set sail from New York. By this time, World War I had already broken out, and the German Navy was systematically sinking merchant vessels one by one. The strategy that was used by the Germans during both World War I and World War II was to literally starve the British into submission by hopefully choking the needed supplies to the British. They could get them to surrender. The British, the British were fed up with the Germans sinking the merchant vessels, so in violation of Geneva Convention at that time, they would use supposedly neutral vessels to transport munitions, whether it be a commercial vessel for the British, or maybe they'd have a British ship, but have it fly a neutral flag. The U.S. Was the most common flag that they would use. One of the British's favorite techniques was to use what were known as Q ships. These would be designed as merchant vessels. The Germans would follow the protocol at that time. They would surface, give them the time to abandon ship, and then they would go ahead and either use deck guns and torpedo it. But after doing this about a year into the war, it became pretty risky, so the decision was made that any ship carrying the British flag would be torpedoed without regard for safety for passengers and crew. About a week before the Lusitania set sail for her last voyage, the Germans were sinking all kinds of merchant vessels. The U-boat was not exactly an ideal weapon. It was cramped. The interior really smelled real bad. Space was at a premium, and its weapons were much better. When the thing would fire a torpedo, half the times the thing would misfire. But when it was able to fire the torpedo, it was deadly effective. The person who invented the U-boat, I forgot his name, had intended it for the American vessels, for the American Navy, but they thought so inhuman and so unwarlike. The person instead had to sell for the Germans. The Kaiser, then the Chancellor of Germany, saw the potential of U-boats and ordered them in great order. The U-20 was one U-boat that would make history. He was under orders to systematically sink merchant vessels one by one, without any regard to whether they were neutral or war. Well, on May 1st, 1915, the Lusitania set sail from New York. It was a grand occasion. Whenever a ship sets sail from from a port, it's always a grand event. People from all walks of life, whether rich or poor, would observe the awe of the Lusitania. She was a wonderful vessel, 785 feet long, and captained by William Turner, a veteran of 30 years for the Cunard Line. And the wealthy passengers were something to look at. Among them were Alfred Vanderbilt, a well-known millionaire tycoon, was setting sail for England to attend a meeting of the International Horse Breeders Association, and also the well-known theatrical producer Charles Frohman, who introduced the play Peter Pan to American audiences. And also, along with the wealthy people were the people that weren't so wealthy. America was a disappointment to them, and they were eager to return to their native land. But a couple weeks before they set sail, a warning appeared in the New York Times. Any vessel holding the British flag or its allies would do so at their own risk. Not many people had heard of the warning, and those who had heard of the warning took it with only a grain of salt. Lusitania is the quickest vessel afloat. Nothing will happen. Others weren't even warned. Well, by ironic twist, this warning had appeared next door to a sailing notice that the Lusitania was going to set sail May 1st. After a series of security measures, the Lusitania set sail. They had earlier had some rumors that that the Germans were wanting to sabotage the Lusitania. And in the bowels of the ship, there were 3 unknown people that supposedly were going to sabotage the ship, but were thrown in the brig, and nothing was heard from it. Well, the voyage was relatively uneventful. The U-boat has systematically sunk various merchant vessels, captained by Walter Schreger, who was well known in the German Navy as an efficient captain, would curse and swear about all the bad luck he had had sinking all kinds of vessels. Some he had luck with, some he hadn't. Now there was some talk that the U-boat Captain Schreger had fell along with other officers with the German Navy that the Lusitania was in violation of war, carrying war munitions for the effort. But the only confirmed cargo aboard the Lusitania that was war-related were bullets, hidden among barrels of cheese. But there was some talk that they were carrying more dangerous cargo, gun cotton, TNT, bombs. But these rumors were never confirmed. Well, anyways, the Lusitania was just going past the lighthouse at Old Kinsale, less than a day's sail from safety. And then all of a sudden, Captain Schreger receives a notice of U-boat activity. Go zigzag course, steer mid-channel, maintain top speed. The Captain Turner took these with a grain of salt. Anyways, he was under orders to conserve coal, so one of the boilers was shut down, so it's going at leisurely 20 knots and maintain fairly straight course. Well, at high noon, just when it looked like it was going to make it, Captain Schreger, having no hope of sinking the Lusitania, decided to go ahead and take a chance and submerge. To Captain Schreger's shock, the Lusitania made a hard starboard, turning right directly into the Lusitania's path. Immediately, Captain Schreger gives the order to fire 1 torpedo. You could hear that torpedo whisk through the water, and then it hit right behind behind the bridge in this ship, and there was a relatively minor explosion. And then a few seconds later, a much more powerful explosion could be heard. Then immediately, the Lusitania started to take a nosedive. The people were in such a panic state that there was some confusion about which lifeboats they were supposed to go to, because of the Titanic disaster 3 years earlier. There was a requirement there be lifeboats for everybody, and that there'd be training in their use. But aboard the Lusitania, these regulations were not observed. There was panic all over the place. No one knew which lifeboat. No one had instructed them which lifeboat to go to or what the procedures were. They were scrambling all over the lifeboat, wondering what the heck we're supposed to be doing. And it just amazes me how they're supposed to know where they're supposed to go. The Lusitania crew was horribly untrained for this. I think people should have learned their lesson from the Titanic. The crew should have been should have been trained, but in this case they weren't. And I just wonder whether people learn anything when it comes to disasters. But I think the Lusitania tells otherwise. Slowly but surely, the Lusitania started to go down. And not only to the lifeboats, but we're also going to tops of the deck, hoping beyond hope they would be spared. And then finally, slowly but surely, down it went. And then, at the same time it was going down, it started to take a heavier and heavier list to starboard, to the ship's right side. And then, after 18 minutes, it was gone. And she had taken 1,200 people with her, including 128 Americans. It was the second worst disaster of its time. Again, if you have any questions about the Lusitania or any other ships, please give me a call, 422-3902. I will be focusing, as I said earlier, I'll be focusing on the Lusitania, but this show is about ships in general. Well, anyway, all kinds of people were moaning in the water. One woman in the video, The Last Voyage of the Lusitania, was talking about how it was a half a circle. People were struggling to try to get above the lifeboats. And on board the ship, most of them hadn't even made it to the deck. When the torpedo struck, the ship's power was completely knocked out. So they were trapped in the elevators, third-class staterooms, the boilers. And then there were, as far as the people that were in the water, they were free. It was 30 degrees above Fahrenheit. If they didn't die of drowning, exposure would also would surely do them in. But slowly but surely, the lifeboats made it to safety. Over the weeks, there were attempts to find bodies from the ship that went as far as Wales. In all, over 300 were found out of a complement of 1,200. Alfred Vanderbilt's body was found. Charles Frohman's body, it was Charles Frohman's body that was found. Alfred Vanderbilt's never was. And of the over 300 bodies that were found, 60 were never identified. Unlike the Titanic, where there were horrible discrepancies among the classes, among the Lusitania, the seaplane no favorites. Like among children, only 27% of the children survived. If you ever watched the video Last Voyage of the Lusitania, I saw a coffin with a baby in it. That, more than anything else, made me sick. I mean, these were people that were neutral. They didn't have anything to do with the war. And then here they were sensibly killed. And to add insult upon injury, a few years later, Captain Trigger got a medal for his for the successful for a successful voyage. Over the years, there's been a question about what caused the second explosion aboard the Lusitania. The British strongly believe that even today that it was not munitions. They vehemently denied there were munitions aboard the ship. But right now, I think the evidence speaks otherwise. I mean, when you consider an explosion like that, I mean, this wasn't a simple firecracker. I mean, bang! An explosion that would cause anybody lose his hearing. And I seriously doubt a second torpedo would cause that much explosion. Yeah, there was some talk there were two torpedoes fired. One that went behind the bridge, and another one that went aft, which destroyed the engine, and that's what actually doomed the ship. There was a British inquiry started that promptly blamed Germany. But a record historians recovered made by First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill, as you well know, was Prime Minister during the Second World War, had actually was some talk that he had deliberately sacrificed the Lusitania to get America into the war. But so far, historians have debated what caused that second explosion. About 20 years later, Jim Gerard had found the Lusitania in 300 feet of water. At that time, he mistakenly thought the ship was laying on its port side. Later, divers was laying down on its port side, but historians had later determined it was, in fact, laying on its port side. John Light in the 1960s had dived on the Lusitania to determine exactly what caused the second explosion. And he got his proof, at least what he thought was proof. A gigantic hole in the aft powder magazine. This is the magazine that if the ship was carrying any kind of munitions, this is where it would be stored. And according to him, it was completely total. Anyone who's listening to the show maybe has a different opinion about what caused that second explosion, or maybe you'd like to know who was at fault. Was it the Germans recklessly firing the torpedo at any ship it saw, or was it the British who deliberately sacrificed the Lusitania to get America into the war? I give you an opportunity to discuss these issues. The number is 422-3902. The British inquiry into the Lusitania disaster conducted by Lord Mersey, who had also conducted the famous Titanic disaster, although this one was hardly unbiased. They wasted little time blaming the Germans and completely absolved themselves of any blame for the disaster. The Germans, on the other hand, accused the British of using the Lusitania as an excuse for getting the America in the war. There were 128 Americans that died on the vessel. And by getting those Americans killed, the British had thought Americans would be so angered by what the Germans had done. The battle cry was "Avenge the Lusitania," and that had been the theme for the and that had been the theme throughout the rest of World War I, then called the Great War. This is a controversy that lingers to this day. Who was at fault, the British or the Germans? Oceanographer Bob Ballard had wanted to put this controversy permanently to rest. So he sent down, had sent down 3 underwater robots and 1 submersible to explore the Lusitania and confirm John Light's theory about the munitions. Well, he had sent the robot down to sent Jason to examine the hull, but to everybody's shock, the hull was well forward of the powder magazine. So if there were explosives aboard the ship, it was not what caused the disaster. So the theory that had been around for 80 years was suddenly blown to pieces, and no one was any closer to knowing what caused the disaster than before. But Bob Ballard, not to be deterred, was determined to find out what had happened. So he went down the delta to follow the trail the Lusitania took on its dive down. Sure enough, there was a long trail of coal leading up to the ship. My understanding is when you get towards the end of the voyage, the coal was almost depleted, except for this thin layer of coal. There was this gas that was built up among the coal. So when the torpedo struck the Lusitania, the coal dust was thrown up, that coal dust was ignited, and then that's what caused the second explosion. But to this day, historians cannot agree 100% what caused that second explosion. For those who want my personal opinion, I support Bob Ballard's theory. For starters, I don't see how you can ignite explosives and yet not have them explode. It just makes me sick. All these people who sensibly died because of one torpedo. I mean, one thing you should keep in mind about the Lusitania, this was no weak vessel. It had many, many more compartments than the Titanic. And unlike the Titanic had an iceberg cutting a large gas into the starboard side of the ship, it was one single torpedo. One single torpedo, and the ship was gone in 18 minutes. To this day, historians cannot agree on why that is. Again, I give you an opportunity to call 422-3902. If you have your own theory about what caused the Lusitania disaster, well, whether the Germans were at fault or whether it was the British, well, what caused that second explosion? And to me, I think there was plenty of blame to go around. Captain Turner had been specifically told to go a zigzag course and go top speed. He failed to do so. And Captain Turner knew, best of my knowledge, knew perfectly well that the Lusitania was supposed to be a neutral vessel, although I'm confident he didn't believe it for a minute. So when he saw the Lusitania, he was convinced that it was not a neutral vessel, so he went ahead and torpedoed it. And it wasn't just Americans. There were people all over Europe that were completely neutral during the war. And no one, to this day, it just makes me sick that people who had no thoughts of war was just there enjoying a cruise that they had paid for, and then here they were. They see the torpedo and bang, they were gone. I personally think that there is enough blame to go around. Captain Schrager had thought that he was doing his country a favor, when in fact he 2 years later he was ensuring that Americans would enter the war. President Woodrow Wilson, in spite of all the American lives that have been lost, was vehement about staying out of the war. As a matter of fact, that was the theme of his 1960 election, to stay out of the war. So instead of giving him a firm warning, he did a little more than pat him on the back and say, "Don't do that again." Although, for the most part, I thought Woodrow Wilson was a great president, in this one case, I think he was being very weak. He should have told Germany flat out, if this continues, we're going to go to war. By the way, the Americans did enter the war in 1917, but it wasn't exactly unanimous. There were many people who were opposed to the war, but we did end up entering it, and the battle cry avenged the Lusitania. By the way, I had mentioned that the Lusitania had a sister ship called the Mauretania. Unlike her well-known sister ship, she did survive World War I as a passenger vessel, and after the war was a successful passenger vessel until 1935, when it was declared obsolete and was promptly scrapped. Although the Mauretania was a great vessel, the Lusitania is the vessel that I like to think most of when it comes to World War I. This was a great disaster. A ship that everybody on both sides admired, and here it was made into a sacrificial lamb to get America into the war. 1,200 people died on this ship. People who lived in completely neutral countries have sensibly lost their lives in this disaster. And I just don't understand why these people had to be slaughtered just to get America into the war. Oh, by the way, there's an interesting footnote to this disaster. A stoker by the name of Frank Towers has supposedly been on three famous shipwrecks: the Titanic, the Lusitania, and the Empress of Ireland. And to this day, historians cannot confirm whether he was on all three ships. In any event, he never got a job as a stoker again. These people that died in the disaster were not meant to be pawns to be used to promote people into war. These were innocent people. These are people who had no thoughts of war, were only interested in a nice, peaceful voyage to Liverpool. I give you the opportunity to call in 423902 to give your give your opinion about what you thought caused the disaster. I mentioned explosives and coal dust. There are many other possibilities. Explosives and coal dust are the only two that I'm aware of. I'm confident there have been many theories that have been advanced. Right now, coal dust seems to be the most likely. I mean, think about it. When you got explosions in a magazine, how the heck can you ignite explosives and it not explode? That doesn't make any sense. So my belief is coal dust makes the most sense. I mean, the ship was towards the end of its voyage. So so the coal had been pretty much all depleted, except for that thin layer of coal that would be at the bottom of the ship. So when that torpedo struck, that's what a lot of people believe caused that second explosion. So basically, as far as the split's concerned, I think it's pretty much 50-50. Captain Turner knew perfectly well that he was putting his ship in great danger. I mean, it was just like Edward Smith with the Titanic. He thought the Lusitania could outrun any U-boat. He thought he was invincible. Boy, was he proven wrong. Lusitania, like the Titanic, presents a very strong message. Never put your total faith in technology. There's always a chance that something could go wrong. Here we are. A ship that was supposedly unsinkable. We've heard that before, haven't we? Supposedly unsinkable, and yet one torpedo dooms the ship in 18 minutes. And I, as like anyone else, can't understand how one torpedo could sink a supposedly unsinkable ship. Again, I give you an opportunity to call 422-3902 if you have any questions about the Lusitania, or you have some theories of your own, or maybe not just the Lusitania. Maybe you'd like to talk about the hit movie that everybody's talking about, or ships in general. Well, in any event, with the Lusitania, I think I'm hesitant to say we learned our lesson. People are very slow learners when it comes to history. It seems like we conquer the problem, let's go on, and then something goes wrong. You solve the problem, conquer it, then something else goes wrong. It happens all the time. People are so convinced that absolutely nothing is going to go wrong, and then presto, something is completely the opposite goes on. And A more recent example of that was the Challenger tragedy. I mean, people thought shuttles were safe. One explosion dashed the hopes of a safe sub. A safe shuttle. I mean, people need to understand technology is not infallible. Anytime we try to challenge the Almighty, something is inevitably going to go wrong. I mean, keep in mind, U-boats were not exactly state-of-the-art. I mean, half the time, torpedoes would get jammed in the torpedo tube and wouldn't be able to do anything with them. And a lot of times, even they were able to clear the tube, the explosive mechanism in the torpedo wouldn't explode. So, and I really think to say Captain Trigger was lucky would be an understatement. Given any other circumstances, the torpedo that sunk the Lusitania would have been a little more of a nuisance, and Lusitania would have been able to sail on her merry way. But for some unknown reason, this torpedo was able to hit the ship just right, and down it went. One theory that's been proposed as far as the speed of the ship is that when the torpedo struck, the power was completely knocked out. So the watertight doors were rendered inoperative, so they had no way of closing them. Although that theory I have a little reservations. With watertight compartments, when they're closed, they spill one to the other and one to the other. If the watertight doors hadn't closed, it would have pretty much gone down straight at a fairly slow rate. So I believe the watertight doors were closed. Captain Turner had ordered the, just the day before the disaster, had ordered all the watertight doors to be closed. So, we can pretty much dismiss that as a theory as far as what actually doomed the ship. I again give you an opportunity to call 422-3902 if you have any questions about the Lusitania, or maybe you have some comments, or maybe there's something I should be covering that I haven't. I view Captain Turner as an arrogant person. Oh, by the way, he did make it. He found a floating piano and managed to get on it. And he was part of the, participated in the British inquiry as far as what caused the disaster. He later died in the 1930s. Forever vilified for his inaction concerning trying to keep the Lusitania safe from harm. I mean, this guy had the attitude, oh, I've got nothing to worry about. Lusitania can outrun any any U-boat. Although in a way he had reason to be cocky. U-boats were only 9 knots. Lusitania was 24. But somehow, the U-boat was able to get itself in the correct position, and then Captain Schrager was able to fire that torpedo, and down it went. People just it's not also an example of how arrogant can be. Pride is nice, but there's too much. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. When you put pride carried too far, in my opinion, is stupidity. When you put too much faith in technology, inevitably something is going to go wrong. History has proven that. A lot of things have proven that. Technology can be made better, but it can never, ever be made infallible. And it's just senseless how the Lusitania had to be so sensibly sacrificed just to make a point. And Winston Churchill was once quoted as saying, get in trouble and more trouble, the better still. Not only did he knew the Lusitania was going to be torpedoed, he was counting on it. I mean, this, for crying out loud, the Lusitania was British. His own country ship. And it just amazes me how he would be willing to sacrifice a ship of his own country just to make a point. And 1,200 people, 1,200 people died so senselessly. I mean, here they were. War couldn't be the furthest thing from their mind. They had no animosity to anybody. They were just there to, like anyone else, to enjoy a nice, peaceful cruise, a nice, peaceful voyage to Liverpool. And the lack of training on the part of the crew only compounded the problem. I mean, I thought we learned our lesson from the Titanic. I mean, with the Titanic, there were barely enough lifeboats for 1,200 people, and no one was trained on their use. And with the Lusitania, adequate lifeboats were provided, but the problem is the ship was very poorly designed. When the ship took a heavy list to starboard, the port lifeboats were rendered useless. And there were a couple times when the lifeboats were launched, they would tip over, spilling people into the water. I thought I'd take an opportunity to recommend some literature. This is Exploring the Lusitania by Dr. Robert Ballard, well-noted oceanographer for the Woods Hole. He's well known for finding the Titanic, not the Lusitania, but the Bismarck, and also other vessels. And he had dived the Lusitania to find out what caused it. He, when asked what caused the disaster, he said in one very simple term: bad luck. And I think that pretty much sums it. Another book I'd like to recommend is this one. I'm not even going to bother trying to discuss the title, but it gets into great detail as far as what construction was involved, how much work was in it, and you could spend hours on end trying to learn it all. And as far as videotapes are concerned, I'd like to also recommend this book called this video called Winsor McKay, a pioneer in animation. For those who've studied animation, I've seen some of his work, like Gertie the Dinosaur and Flip. These were the old cartoons, the kind that didn't have any words to it. It was just pictures and just drawings and music. But the Lusitania, he really sent the message home as far as the impact the disaster had. Also, I'd like to recommend the Last Voyage of the Lusitania, based on Bob Ballard's book. This video talks extensively about the Lusitania, the disaster, and this is something unusual for a video. At the end, they show how the video was made, including a part where Jason was caught in a net and they had a hard time trying to get him loose. And the last one I'd recommend is this is a series of A&E videos called World War I. This talks about the Lusitania. This gets into great depth as far as U-boat activity. Talks about the mass grave. That's one thing I forgot to mention. When the bodies that were recovered, they were unceremoniously buried. They were just put in a grave, into a coffin, thrown in a grave, and then just threw dirt. No ceremony, no anything. They were just buried. And that picture really sent home the message as far as the impact that the disaster had on people. If you ever see the book Exploring the Lusitania, I would encourage you to look at a drawing by a painting by Ken Marshall. He does all of Bob Ballard's artwork on when it comes to his books, and you get a pretty good idea of what the Lusitania looks like today. You can't even recognize it. All the funnels are gone. She's she's eroded quite extensively, and when people died aboard the ship, for some reason they exploded 3 of the ship's propellers loose and had one of them melted down for scrap. I mean, come on. This is a grave, and they're exploding a propeller loose for paying for the expedition. I am a very strong believer in pretty much leaving the ship where it is. There are cases where I think artifacts should be brought up, but vast majority of the time, I like to see the ship left right where it is, untouched. The ship is much more enjoyable the way it is. I mean, that's the problem with the scuba divers. They love souvenirs. When they go aboard the ship, they whip out a bag, stuff all they can in the bag, and then take off. And that cheats the rest of us out of ever having to see that artifact. Oh, one thing I did forget to cover. Bob Ballard had mentioned why he thought that John Lyon had made a mistake. For those of you out there that are not scuba divers, there's a term called nitrogen nicosis. When a person dives a certain feat, he loses his ability to make good decisions and tends to make mistakes easier. As a rule of thumb, for every 30 feet you dive, you feel the effects of 1 martini. So when you dive the Lusitania, you're feeling the effects of 10 martinis. So here he is, diving the ship like some weirdo, expecting to find something. When he supposedly finds it, he says, "Look, I just found a ship. I found a hole that sunk the ship." Well, thanks to the invention of robots, were able to determine that if it was explosions, that's not what caused it. One of the big problems with exploring the vessel is the ship is heavily on its starboard side. This is the side where the torpedo struck. So we have no way of knowing if the extent of that hole that supposedly sank it. And it would be nice if there was some way we could go inside the Lusitania. Go inside and learn once and for all whether there were munitions. I'm confident they'd be pretty soggy by now. But I'm confident the evidence of war munitions to still be down there. As far as the possibility it was carrying more munitions, I'm almost willing to place money on it. And I emphasize almost because we don't know. Those that were alive then are too young to remember. And so we're really, although I'm going to say it with 95% certainty that it was carrying munitions, in any event, it was not carrying munitions in such a way. It was not what caused the disaster. So we can pretty much say was called us. I give you one last opportunity to make a call, 422-3902 if you have any questions about the Lusitania or comments. Right now, I really, to say in a nutshell, this was senseless. These were innocent people. Innocent people who had absolutely nothing to do with the war whatsoever. And yet they had to be set. Okay. Thanks a lot for watching Tragedies, and I look forward to you watching my next show. I'm on the first Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. Brought up. By the time it was over, there were only two shipping lines left that were privately owned. The Cunard line just happened to be one of them. But the British government was afraid that the Cunard line would follow suit. To keep this from happening, the British government offered a loan to the Cunard line to build two ships on the condition they remain British for at least 20 years and that they be well built in such a way that they could be easily converted for war purposes. Thus, the Lusitania and the Mauretania were born. The Mauretania would follow suit a couple of years later and would be considerably faster than Lucy, what shipwrights like to call her. One person described the Lusitania as the most beautiful ship, more beautiful than Solomon's Temple, and large enough to hold all of his wives. If you have any questions about the Lusitania or any other ships that I've been discussing, the number is 422-3902. when I do a show, I always focus in on a particular ship, but you're free to talk about any ship you'd like to, whether it be the hit movie you've heard so much about, got the 11 Oscars, or the Monitor or whatever. Well, anyway, the Lusitania was 9 years after she was launched. She set sail from New York. By this time, World War I had already broken out, and the German Navy was systematically sinking merchant vessels one by one, masters and crew. About a week before the Lusitania set sail for her last voyage, the Germans were sinking all kinds of merchant vessels. The U-boat was not exactly an ideal weapon. It was cramped. The interior really smelled real bad. It was space was at a premium, and its weapons were much better. When the thing would fire a torpedo, half the times the thing would misfire. But when it was able to fire the torpedo, it was deadly effective. The person who invented the U-boat, I forgot his name, had intended it for the American vessels, for the American Navy, but they thought so inhuman and so unwarlike. The person instead had to sell for the Germans. The Kaiser, then the Chancellor of Germany, saw the potential of U-boats and ordered them in great order. The U-20 was one U-boat that would make history. He was under orders to systematically sink merchant vessels one by one, without any regard to whether they were neutral or war. Well, on May 1st, 1915, the Lusitania set sail from New York. It was a grand occasion. Whenever a ship sets sail from from a port, it's always a grand event. People from all walks of life, whether rich or poor, would observe the awe of the Lusitania. She was a wonderful vessel, 785 feet long, and captained by William Turner, a veteran of 30 years for the Cunard Line. And the wealthy passengers were something to look at. Among them were Alfred Vanderbilt, a well-known millionaire tycoon, was setting sail for England to attend a meeting of the International Horse Breeders Association, and also the well-known theatrical producer Charles Frohman, who introduced the play Peter Pan to American audiences. And also, along with the wealthy people were the people that weren't so wealthy. That America was a disappointment to them, and they were eager to return to their native land. But a couple weeks before they set sail, a warning appeared in the New York Times. Any vessel holding the British flag or its allies would do so at their own risk. Not many people had heard of the warning, and those who had heard of the warning took it with only a grain of salt. Lusitania is the quickest vessel afloat. Nothing will happen. Others weren't even were warned. Well, by ironic twist, this warning had appeared next door to suddenly noticed that the Lusitania was going to set sail May 1st. Hello and welcome to Tragedies at Sea. I'm Mickey Hansen. Today we're going to be talking about the Lusitania, the grandest liner of her day, thrice winner of the Blue Riband, the ribbon given to the world's fastest ship. Her top speed was 24 knots. She was launched June 6, 1906. The first 3 superliners built for the Cunard line. Her story begins with J.P. Morgan, the well-known millionaire tycoon, buying up various shipping lines, which would be named the International Merchant Marine. One by one, transit lines were being brought. The strategy that was used by the Germans during both World War I and World War II was to literally starve the British into submission by hopefully choking the needed supplies to the British. They could get them to surrender. The British, the British were fed up with the Germans sinking the merchant vessels, so in violation of Geneva Convention at that time, they would use supposedly neutral vessels to transport munitions, whether it be a commercial vessel for the British, or maybe they'd have a British ship, but have it fly a neutral flag. The U.S. Was the most common flag that they would use. One of the British's favorite techniques was to use what were known as Q ships. These would be designed as merchant vessels. The Germans would follow the protocol at that time. They would surface, give them the time to abandon ship, and then they would go ahead and either use deck guns and torpedo it. But after doing this about a year into the war, it became pretty risky, so the decision was made that any ship carrying the British flag would be torpedoed without regard for safety for passengers.